Here we go. Should Cowboys fans be nervous that George Pickens was a deal breaker for Steelers coach Mike Tomlin? Let's discuss that and all of the angles on the Cowboys trade for George Pickens. Welcome into How About Wow, home of the best Cowboys debates centered around the premise of getting the Cowboys back to their golden era of football. I'm Gavin Dawson along with Newbear. And how the hell are you, buddy? Good to see you.
Yeah, feeling a lot better. Rough weekend over here. Kids brought the bug home from school.
Oh, that's always fun. Okay,
Yeah.
Please like the video. Please subscribe to the show. It's one of the most important things you can do to tell YouTube that you like the show and you think other people should watch it. The other thing that you can do is hit that bell button so you can get alerted whenever we upload and watch a high percentage of the total run time of the show. That's what you can do for us, okay? We're just sitting over here cranking out free Cowboys content for you. And let's start with this story. Newbear, you're in Pittsburgh. We need to tap into that. Mike Tomlin reportedly driving the decision to trade George Pickens. This is Mark Kaboly, longtime Steelers writer. He's there on the Pat McAfee show. And, should Cowboys fans be concerned is the topic for you, Newbear. Go ahead.
This was the only thing, right, is that there's all these other things. The on-field talent, the on-field exploits, also include all this stuff that comes with it. And sometimes that even spills over to while the ball's in play, right? He was fighting dudes during a Hail Mary. He flat out categorically denied the statement, right? The New York Post and everyone else who's running with this. And he said he was on a plane with no service, throwing the whole Steelers organization under the bus and the way that they do things and getting rid of guys before they pay them. The one thing about this is that because of everything that goes into who George Pickens is, even if it is AI, it's believable. And the other side of the coin is that if it were to be something that he posted, if the screenshots are real and it's not AI, then it's also true because the Steelers have moved on from and otherwise played chicken with everyone from Le'Veon Bell to Antonio Brown, right? And Juju Smith-Schuster, right? This is a pattern that they have of moving on from guys either as they become problems or right as that escalates to try to get as much as they can on their way out of town.
Yeah, and I understand. I do think it's possible, though, that and it's realistic that you can have a player that has worn out his welcome in one place, and he might be the perfect fit for another team that's just, has not had the experience with that player or has a massive need at the position, doesn't have a coach who's, has a long track record of being annoyed with that player. And I also think it is possible with young players that, this kind of career change is what they need to get a different perspective on what they've brought to the party for the first 3-4 years of their career. But I think it makes most sense for the Cowboys just because it is just 1 year left on his rookie contract. And the idea that players are typically putting their best foot forward in their contract year, I think this might be a perfect storm for it to work out for the Cowboys to have the George Pickens experience with limiting the downside as much as that is possible.
Well,
okay, what does
his agent came out and said that he doesn't want a new contract. He wants to play this year and prove that he's that guy. And I think what a lot of people forget in all of this, right, is the Steelers are a paradox. They win games, they get into the playoffs, they get blown out in the first round, but they do it their way, right? They are the most stubborn organization in the NFL, and they're the only ones who are getting
Cowboys might be giving them a run for the money on that.
Right, but the Steelers are winning just enough to justify the way they do business, right? They're in the playoffs.
The Cowboys.
But they're not winning 10, 11 games, getting the playoffs every year. No one's talking about their coach never having had a losing season. That's the new standard, right, in Pittsburgh. And lost in all of that is Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. Lost in all that is the Steelers are now in the exact same position that they were before they signed DK Metcalf. They just paid him. And I think one of the biggest reasons that George Pickens is no longer here is that if he was going to hold out and be a problem or hold in and be a problem, it would have been here. He now has to go to Dallas and play this thing out on a string and hope that right? Because if he doesn't do that, he's in Canada.
Yeah. No, and this is perfect for the Cowboys. I think you have a player who's motivated for all the right reasons. But, I do think the Cowboys and Steelers are highly similar in that they don't want to do anything, Newbear, that can take away their ability to be relevant every single season, right? You get higher lows, but you also get lower highs this way, where you are engagement farming your fan base to try to make them believe every year we got a shot, this can be it. If you actually take a big swing like Tampa or the Rams or the 49ers or the Eagles, there is a significant trough to that yo-yo, and you might be bad for 2, 3, 4 years. And for an iconic brand like the Steelers and the Cowboys, that is a bigger potential loss when it comes to your ability to sell merchandise and drive television ratings over a decade-long span. They are building their roster to maximize ratings over the long period instead of maximize their opportunity for the Super Bowl. Is that what you see in Pittsburgh? Because that's definitely what I see with the Cowboys.
Well, it's 1,000% the truth here, right? Because you could say the same thing about the Penguins, and who knows what the hell's happening in the baseball world, right? Relative to, thankfully there's one team this year and there was one team last year that's worse than the Pirates. But short of digressing into an all sports conversation, right, and an all other city conversation, bringing this thing back to Dallas, I think what you're talking about is the most inspired, right, the most inspiring element of this trade is that this harkens back to 1995 and Deion Sanders being in San Francisco the year before and being the reason that, let's be honest, the Cowboys didn't three-peat. He shifts the balance of the league coming to Dallas, and in order to do that in 1995, they had to do all kinds of salary cap stuff. They had to make really tough decisions to go get the biggest name, right, to sign him to the biggest contract, and to really shift the balance of power, not just in the NFC, but at the time in the league. It was really, right, who was going to win that game in the NFC Championship game, Niners, Cowboys. When was the last time they did something like this? The last time they did it at receiver was with Amari Cooper, right? We talked about that last week. But specifically relative to this, it gives them the ability to, as this conversation we have here today, but also in the coming weeks, months into the season evolves, you can argue that the two of these guys together, meaning CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, are as good as it gets. And they now have a chance to prove it in a way, like you said, perfect storm, nobody else would have had. He would not have had that here in Pittsburgh opposite DK Metcalf with maybe Aaron Rodgers, with maybe Mason Rudolph, with maybe Will Howard. He gets a known entity in the $60 million man, Dak Prescott. He gets a known entity in a top three, arguably wide receiver one, CeeDee Lamb. And he now gets to go, and he's saying all the right things. I don't care about wide receiver one, wide receiver two. I don't even care about wide receiver 1A and 1B. I want to go prove that I can complement this man, CeeDee Lamb, and show the world what I can do.
All right, okay, up next here, next topic in How About Wow. Please hit that like button if you're enjoying the Cowboy conversation. What does the acquisition mean for the Cowboys in their quest to regain glory? For me, Newbear, I think it's a golden opportunity for George Pickens. I think for the team, this is a chance to catch lightning in a bottle still. I'm looking for them to go out and try to build a roster as good as the Eagles. So, we still have massive holes. You're probably going to get run against. Your linebackers are either young, hurt, or old. Your safeties are below average. Your corner room is devastated by injury right now, hoping to get healthy by midseason, at which point, you might end up being, pretty dang good at taking the ball away. So, I need to see a left tackle here, though. That would give me confidence. Right now, I think you're heading for a season in which you have a Dak Prescott making a lot of plays, but also throwing too many interceptions ultimately to give me confidence they can win in January.
This is going to be a really interesting summer into the run-up to the season and roster cuts, because Miles Sanders might be a guy, or Javonte Williams, right, depending on how camp goes, that finds themselves on the chopping block. At the same time, when we were talking about would the Cowboys go as far as giving up 12 or 44 for Pickens, they didn't have to do either one of those things. They gave up a 3. So now they have made a splash, a blockbuster trade. All intents and purposes, Pickens goes out and does what Pickens can do. They fleece the Steelers for a 3, right? A 3 the Steelers would have gotten anyway, compensatory. A 3 that the Cowboys will get if they let him walk, right? And like you said, in a best case scenario, they now have found CeeDee Lamb's running mate for the next half decade, and they are arguably the most explosive offense in the NFL with only one hole to solve, which is his bell cow back. And in the way the league has moved, if someone like Blue is able to step in as a rookie and be that 15-touch-a-game difference maker, and they can find a guy like Javonte Williams, now 2 full years removed from the ACL, who can pick up blitzes, put his face in the fan on third down, and start answering some of those questions, whatever the question is, whether it's who's carrying the ball, which is the one I've been asking for 2 weeks, who's the left tackle, which is the one that you've been asking the whole time, the Cowboys have shown now that they're willing to make moves, they're willing to take risks. And if Guyton shows up at camp and he looks like Mason Graham going around Twitter yesterday in Cleveland, and he looks like the same guy last year who was either giving up free runs to the quarterback or committing penalties on his way to trying to stop a dude that he needed to block, who's to say the Cowboys wouldn't make a move now? Because the Pickens move changes everything. And that's why I keep going back to inspired and inspiring, is if they're really willing to pull the string and they're willing to say, we're only a player or two, we're only a difference maker or two, and then they get any injury luck, they get any football gods bounce of the ball, fumbles return to normalcy and those kinds of things. Dak's going to take care of the ball. Dak loves to throw go balls and hitches. He's got 2 dudes. You can only double one. Again, you just start answering questions and you change the conversation because you're changing the math. You're no longer saying, oh, we don't have a wide receiver 2 and we don't have a left tackle and we don't have a running back. All of a sudden, you're only now a piece or 2 away from this being a completely different conversation.
Yeah, looking at points per game, it is miserable where they were last year. 20 points per game. Now, half of that was with Cooper Rush. But, you talk about what could this trade fix offensively for them. Newbear, we've never seen Dak Prescott be able to continue to run a prolific offense if his run game isn't good and if the protection isn't great. Right? That this will break down against good defenses, particularly defenses that can get a rush with 4 or 5 guys and drop the rest. So my question is, George Pickens good enough that Dak Prescott can now give you some of that Joe Burrow with Higgins and Chase, right? My protection isn't good. My run game is non-existent, but we're still going to go hang 30 on you because Dak because of Pickens and because of CeeDee Lamb, maybe some Jake Ferguson in there. What do you say? Is this going to bring an element to Dak's game we have yet to see in the 8 years of his career?
I just go back to the 3-game run with Mason Rudolph, right, that got the Steelers into the playoffs when everyone thought hope was lost and Tomlin was going to finally have his first losing season. And I just go back to slant route, 7 yards on the numbers, 70 yards later, it's a touchdown. What Pickens does is gives you the ability to, if you do have a 2 or 3 yard run on first down, and now you're in 2nd and 7 or 8, hit a slant and let that man go to work. What Pickens also allows you to do is if you get into that 3rd and 5, 6, 7, and that 3rd and medium where you're talking about the clog and cover stuff that you could previously do with CeeDee Lamb, and Pickens ends up single covered, or hell, even if he ends up double covered, but it's a flat-footed safety, you can just throw the ball up and let him go win, right? I think the thing that Pickens does is gives you answers to tough questions, right? They're going to keep having tough questions. Let's be honest. Even if Javonte Williams is healthy or Miles Sanders returns to form, they're not Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, any of the top-tier running backs, right? Even if Jaden Blue is a difference maker, he's not a bell cow back. He's not a 400-touch guy. They're going to continue to have questions. But as they go through the season, provided he's healthy, provided Dak, first and foremost, is healthy, that 20.6 last year is the byproduct of Cooper Rush more than anything, right? But if you're in a situation,
bad under Dak too,
yeah, and the weapons side of it, right, being under pressure, not having a running game, clogging cover on CeeDee Lamb,
weapons were a big part of it.
The biggest part of this that changes is the middle of the field, because if you have Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, right, this is the opportunity for if Ferguson's ever going to take the leap. Right? If Schoonmaker and Ferguson together are going to be able to allow you to be a team in 12 personnel, I'm not talking about Gronk and Hernandez, right? But what I am talking about is being able to be difference makers within your scheme, right? Whatever system you've talked about, the myriad ways that Schottenheimer's going to develop and then evolve throughout the course of the year. One of the most interesting parts of this is what happens in the middle of the field, right? Because we've been talking about Pickens out wide and CeeDee Lamb in the slot. What happens when you go like this, right? And what happens when they're split and now you got Ferguson or Schoonmaker, whoever it is, running the seam, right? Because not every team has a Brian Urlacher, Luke Kuechly type dude being able to run down the middle. And by the way, if the safety's got to go like this, right? Because most teams are defaulting to Tampa 2 or some version of cover 2, right? Most of the time. Mel Kiper Jr. and a bunch of other folks were even talking about how they needed to ban cover 2 because that was the reason that the NFL has seen, scoring and things like that go down or flatline, even in an era where we're basically playing football or basketball on grass. And when you start thinking about the schematic elements of the way that teams play and want to play, a talent like Pickens dictates the opposite way.
I love it. I love it. Up next here in How About Wow, let's take a look at updated wide receiver rankings, my man. Post George Pickens trade, we go to Bleacher Report. Do the Cowboys now have one of the top two-headed monsters? Where would you slot them? Leave a comment down below. Okay, let's get robust conversation going on. Newbear, I know you would love to be chatting with whoever leaves a comment down below, wouldn't you? I know you'd love to have a football conversation with them in the comments.
I can't wait to get howaboutwow.com up and running and get into some more of the P's and Q's beyond just talking to you, once a week. And as we start.
Yeah. Get Newbear in here, somebody in here to really challenge him on these horrible football takes that he's got. Okay.
But so here's what's fascinating about whatever top 10 list, right? So whether you go Bleacher Report, CBS, like everyone's got one, right? And that's the thing about this pick. A third rounder, do not lose in this. That Pickens is a first round talent who fell to the second round because of a knee injury, right, at Georgia. Pickens is an all-pro talent who has had no quarterback, who at one point had a high school level offensive coordinator, and who played for a team that doesn't want to play modern offensive football. Now you're going to put him with Shoddy, with Dak, opposite CeeDee Lamb. And if we're ever going to get the best George Pickens, this is that time. What's awesome about this list is that every single grouping on this list, wherever you go, has a question, comment, concern. To your point about comments, right? So this is typically where you're gonna get the consensus of number one. Chase is probably the best receiver in the NFL all around. It's him, it's Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb's right there, right? Higgins is a four-time 900-yard receiver, caught 10 touchdowns last year. He's a guy who has hamstring issues, who's been off injured, right? And you go to the Eagles, and everyone wants to talk about A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They've also had injury concerns. You're talking about a big guy and a little guy. But more than any of the things that you want to talk about what the players are, it's what they do when they don't get the ball. And we saw the meme and the GIF and all the things with A.J. Brown reading books on the sidelines to calm him down because they're a game or two away from him causing disease of more problems, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing coming off of all this stuff is trades, right? Or free agents, whether it's Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith and Jigma up in Seattle, whether it's taking a look at a rookie, right, like Travis Hunter joining last year's top rookie, Brian Thomas in Jacksonville. Every single one of these guys in the top 10 has questions. I will say, and I will stand by, that if you were at recess picking two dudes, you would be hard-pressed to find two better dudes than CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. George Pickens is the guy just casually doing 360 windmill dunks while you're waiting to pick a flag football team at recess because he's that nuts.
You would not start a team with him, though, if you had the choice of all these other guys, Newbear, because of all the other stuff that he does. He's also the guy that will be fighting the other team while the game is going on. If we're playing one game, we just showed up at recess, and I look out to all the guys. Yes, I might pick Lamb and Pickens, but if I have 5 seconds to Google who these gentlemen are, I'm not starting my wide receiver room if I have the pick of those guys with George Pickens anywhere near it.
So the scoring system becomes interesting, right? Are you talking about production? Are you talking about potential? You're talking about the two of those things together. Go to Tampa, right? Mike Evans has more 1,000-yard seasons to start a career than anyone ever.
He's ancient.
Right. Yeah. He's getting old. He's having injury issues. Godwin's coming off of an ankle that spun around, and they drafted Igbuka, and the McMillan kid played really well.
I get it. The conversation isn't back here. I don't think the conversation even gets interesting at Washington. McLaurin and Debo, are you kidding me? That's offensive. It's Puka and Adams. I'm going with the Cowboys guys over that because of age. And it's Brown and Smith, and I'm probably going with the Cowboys guys over that because of ceiling.
You're not taking Addison and Jefferson over them because Addison's small and because O'Connell's a genius. And are you trusting J.J. McCarthy the same way you trusted Sam Darnold, et cetera, right?
But I'm getting the best player. And Addison is going to be more reliable.
more. So again, what are the rules here of this scale? So this is where the comments section.
Whatever you want. What do you value? I value guys in their prime or before their prime that have still proven they're an all-pro already. And, guys that are reliable, guys that aren't hurt. That's what I want.
So if you're talking about production, you're talking about potential, you're talking about injury history, how can you not look at what CeeDee Lamb has done and what George Pickens has done in spite of the circumstances?
Hey, I love having him, my man. I just don't think it's ideal, and that's probably why next topic is this Cowboys acquisition one for the long term, or is this a rental player situation? And again, back to engagement farming. I don't think the Cowboys are going to sign George Pickens, and I don't think the Cowboys are going to complete the roster build around George Pickens. I think he is mostly here to get Cowboys fans excited after going through one of the most miserably depressing seasons in recent memory, or in franchise history, really.
This dovetails into what is arguably the most important question of the whole thing. What does this make this ceiling for this team? And with the schedule release, the breaking news apparently that they're going to be playing the Super Bowl, defending Super Bowl champions, right, while they're raising that banner on opening, which rarely happens. I don't think it's happened since 2020 or 21. A divisional opponent, let alone a Super Bowl champion, right, while they're raising that banner. What's going to be fascinating to see in this whole thing is when you look at the schedule, it's going to take 10 or 11 wins, right? So if it's going to take 10 or 11 wins, they have, I think, the second toughest schedule. The winning percentage of last year's opponents is something like 57%. And they get what? The NFC East 6 times, and then they get a combination of
NFC North and AFC West.
NFC North and AFC West, right? So you're talking about playoff teams abound, right, on this schedule. And then they also get, Cardinals and Panthers, I think. So when you look at their schedule and you try to find 10, 11 wins, it gets hard really fast if you don't beat the Giants twice, if you don't split with the Commanders, if you don't split with the Eagles, and if you don't clean up against the teams that you're supposed to be. Chicago should be better. Detroit should still be really good. The Vikings might take a step back. What's so crucial, right, to figuring out this year is what does George Pickens show up and be every day, and what do you believe? Because he's a rental if he literally does anything. Right? If he's grabbing dudes by the face mask and getting 15-yard penalties because he has a game where he gets 6 targets, no catches, no yards, no touchdowns. But then at the same time, if he's a dude who in a game like that is a cheerleader and is the first one to celebrate his teammates, you're still asking the question, is he only doing that because he's in a contract year? The Cowboys are going to have to make a really, really, really tricky decision. If dude goes out and catches 70 balls for 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns and is a borderline all-pro, and allows CeeDee Lamb to not be a dude who averages 11 yards a catch, but do some stutter go, show off more of what CeeDee Lamb can do and changes the dynamic of this team. They win the East, they make a run, right? Or they get into a place where they feel like they're just one player away. They're going to be in a situation where they feel like, are we doubling down or are we really playing with the devil here, right? This is going to be a season-long storyline where we might not get the answer until this time next year.
Yeah, I hope you're right that there is a chance that the Cowboys decide to bring George Pickens back. I'm so excited on the concept of being proven wrong about this. I think a couple of things are going on. Number one, Jerry Jones is approaching his mid-80s. Do you want to take another good shot at this, or do you want to keep pretending that we live in an NFL where you can't have a complete roster? Jerry loves telling this story of stepping off a private jet and stepping into a 1992 Ford Bronco, and somebody asked him on that trip, you have a private jet, Jerry. Why are we driving a Ford Bronco to the ranch? And he said, well, you can't have everything, right? And that's his excuse for team building like this. And in the mid-2000s and the early 2010s, there were still teams getting through in the wild card or being the 4th best division winner and going on and winning the Super Bowl. But those things aren't happening. So, I think you appeal to Jerry Jones and say, do you want another great shot at this, or do you want to continue to let your son run this organization like it's a hedge fund that you're most interested in return on investment? Which one is it going to be? And then I think you have to appeal to the son and his kids and say, listen, what happened in the 70s and 90s is great, but eventually the most popular sports franchises in the world, they eventually lose their hold on that. The Yankees are the only one that for an entire century and a half have been the kings of their sport. For everybody else, it's, at one point you could go back in American history, the Cleveland Browns were the kings of the NFL. So can we count on this happening for the next 2-3 decades like it has for the last 2 or 3, especially if you consider Steven, Jerry, and Charlotte don't have the gift of a gab. They can't turn on a microphone or a camera and get the fan base leaning in and engaged.
Right, but they can play the clip from Landman. I mean, Jerry Jones out there trying to win Emmys before he wins a Super Bowl, right? I mean, that clip, but the thing about that clip, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because not only was it awesome, whether you like the show and you're a big fan of, Yellowstone and that whole Taylor Sheridan universe, I don't think there was a script for that. I think dude sat down in a chair and told the truth and said, it's about your kids, it's about your family, it's about... And so his long-term...
Let me jump in there. You're 100% right, because he has said similar things on our radio show, right? He joins us during the football season twice. And I think it goes part and parcel with what I was just saying, is that the priority is not to win the Super Bowl. It is that he's created an empire he can work with his kids in, right? A team that wants to win the Super Bowl is like, I can't let my kids anywhere near football decisions. Are you kidding me? We're competing against Hall of Fame GMs. How can I let my kid compete against that and think we're going to win?
The age thing, right, and the end of an era, even if the empire goes on, his era coming to an end, or at the very least getting closer, that ticking clock, right? That is one of the most interesting parts of this whole equation, because in 1994-95, Jerry Jones proved he could win without Jimmy Johnson. He ain't won since, and he didn't win after all those players got old and started leaving, and him and his boys started making all the decisions for the boys, right? But when you get to the end, right, and when you can see, right, that last chapter, that last scene, and you go, how do I want to go out with this thing, right? Because if he wins one more, and he wins one all these years later, you start having the same conversation that Tom Brady had when he went to Tampa, right? It's a different people are now saying Bill Belichick wasn't any good, right? Brady went to Tampa, they instantly won a Super Bowl. Forget the defense, forget everything else that goes into it. Brady won without Bill, right? If Jerry Jones comes back around now and wins another Super Bowl, the headlines, the Wikipedia page, all the things that go into this empire that he's built are about the Super Bowl and about winning. And the thing that I've hated the most for the past 30 years, watching this franchise relatively fall to this place, even as the ticket sales, even as the merchandise, even as America's team, right, spreads globally, is that he was making decisions. He got rid of Tom Landry because it was about winning and the game had passed him by, right? He got rid of Jimmy Johnson because he wanted to prove that he could win without him. Whether or not that was about winning, it ultimately came down to how he was going to win, right? On the way out, what I want to see him do is make more trades like the one he just made for Pickens and do more things that put them in a position where they're saying, you know what? The Yankees, to your point, there's never been a question about them spending. There's also a salary cap. There's also not a question about them paying the tax. What's going to be fascinating to see about these Cowboys on the way out is, are they the Steelers and are they pretending, right? Or is Jerry Jones serious about hanging one more trophy on the wall?
Yeah, I think the similarities between the two organizations are very interesting, Newbear, and I actually think it's something that most organizations across the NFL have in common, because it is just too easy to sit back, do enough, and make hundreds of millions of dollars without being that competitive, right? I think the league is mostly drunk on money, and it's actually easier than ever to win a Super Bowl if you actually just want to go do it. Thanks for checking out How About Wow. Love that like button for us. It's crucial. Back next week with the top Cowboys debates. Until then, salute.